found a witch. May we burn her? Well, burnings were actually quite rare in England. They were mostly done in Scotland. But anyway, yes, in this video, I'm going to be looking at witches and witch trials in Yorkshire. Now, I'm not going to be looking at spells or what the witches did. So if you're looking for things to go along with your healing crystals or your burning incense, then this isn't the video for you. Rather, I'm going to be looking at how witches were perceived in Yorkshire and persecuted. So let's look at this part of Yorkshire's hidden history. Churches, banners, kings and queens, factories and big machines, castles, forts and in-betweens are stories that are told. Yorkshire had an unusually high rate of witchcraft activity, but most of the accusations were rather mundane and quite transparent, based around illness or the loss of property and goods. For example, in 1656, Janet Benton was accused of witchcraft after Richard Jackson had fallen ill after winning a court case about land rights against Janet Benton. In addition, in 1641 we have a letter which says that a man named Wilkinson, after being accused of witchcraft, had his lands rented to another person, which might possibly have been an incredibly easy way for a landowner to remove a tenant he didn't like. But accusations often took on a much more serious tone. Elizabeth Roberts of Beverley was accused of harassing a man by turning into a cat and, on another occasion, turning into a bee and throwing him around the room. Now, when we think of witch trials, we tend to imagine thousands of women being carted off and executed, or the mass hysteria of the Salem witch trials, but the reality is that this is a bit of an exaggeration. Between 1560 and 1706, there were only around 2,000 official arraignments, or official accusations, and of this, only about 300 people were actually executed. One woman from Yorkshire was even executed during the Salem witch trials. Finally, studying the crucible during high school has become relevant again. Anyway, Elizabeth Jackson was born in a village near Hull, and at the age of 1, in 1638, her family moved to America, settling in a village called Rowley in Massachusetts. If you've watched my Yorkshire Emigrants video, which you should, that name should be familiar, as it's one of the villages I cover. Anyway, she later married and moved to Ipswich, a town near Salem. In 1682, she was accused of witchcraft after a young girl from a local family started having fits, but nothing came of it. However, when the Salem witch trial started in 1692, Elizabeth was named as a witch and her previous accusations were remembered. She was later executed, having been accused of bewitching her brother-in-law's cattle. Now, it's just a complete coincidence that with Elizabeth having no children, any property owned by her husband when he died would pass on to her brother-in-law instead of her. Just a coincidence, you know. Finally, we have Mary Bateman. As the story goes, she was a maid at Ledston Hall and in 1593 had made a remedy for the sickly young son of the master of the house. Now, this remedy was supposed to be rubbed on him and not ingested, but by accident or mistake, he ingested it, was poisoned and died. She was accused of witchcraft and in 1603 was tried at York and executed. Local legend has it that she was burnt on a hill near Castleford, but considering that this was extremely rare in England, it's far more likely she was hanged at York instead. Now, the puzzling thing is if this happened in 1593, why did it take a full 10 years to put it on trial? I haven't been able to find any contemporary sources for it, but it's a nice little legend. Anyway, the story of Mary Bateman is really interesting because it illustrates an important fact that in most communities they relied on local wise women for providing remedies and charms and all these other superstitions and folk practices and beliefs which were deeply held at the time. Now, obviously this made them prime targets for accusations of witchcraft, but they were often incredibly valuable members of a community. We have a petition from Yorkshire in which a woman was accused of witchcraft and 200 people signed it in her defence, showing just how valued these people were in their local communities. Let me get through a few more witches and I can tell you a few methods which you can use to protect yourself against them. The most famous English witch trials were the Pendle witches in Lancashire, but one of them was actually from Yorkshire, Janet Preston, who lived in Gisborne. Now, in 1611, she had been accused of murdering a small child, but had been found not guilty, and in 1612 had been accused of murdering a local landowner. When she was taken to visit his body, it reportedly bled fresh blood. She was found guilty and executed at Knavesmire, near York, which is now the site of York Racecourse. Now obviously there's a fair few folk tales about famous witches, but just two are that of Molly Cass of Leaming, who would speed round at night flying on a broomstick, and Nanny Howe of Kildale, who fell out with the devil and chased him round, and she would have got to him if it had not been for a mischievous little imp who had stepped in to stop her. Finally, we have the famous fake witch of Yorkshire, Mary Bateman, who was executed quite late compared to everyone else. She was born in North Yorkshire and worked as a servant before being fired for theft. She then became a petty thief and con artist and convinced a lot of people that she had supernatural powers. She would sell potions and predict the future, and on one occasion in 1806 managed to convince people in Leeds that she had a chicken which could predict the end of the world. The chicken would lay eggs saying Christ is coming. Obviously she had written on the eggs herself and then stuck them back up the chicken. Anyway, in 1806 she poisoned Rebecca Perigo after she had gone to her for fear that she was under a curse, and she got a lot of money for it, but was caught, found guilty and executed at York. Oddly though, strips of her skin were cut off and sold as magic charms to protect against evil. Now at this point you might be wondering why I haven't mentioned Mother Shipton, the most famous Yorkshire witch who made a series of predictions, some of which people believe have come true today. Well, she's just too famous. I'm a bit of a historical hipster, and there's so much stuff already made about Mother Shipton that I didn't want to cover here, to be honest, but I digress. Just as a minor factoid which didn't really fit in anywhere else, so damaging was being accused of being a witch to your reputation that people would sue over it. In the Archbishopric of York alone, there were at least 22 defamation cases against people who have accused them of being witches. Okay, so let's say that you don't want witches to come near you. What options do you have available? Well, you could carve an X on a wooden post in your house, because this would stop witches coming in through the chimney. This is known as a witch post, and they were almost exclusively done in Yorkshire. Alternatively, you could get an animal heart, stick it with pins, then burn it at midnight in silence with all the windows and doors closed. Or alternatively, you could find a stone with a hole in the middle, as for some reason witches didn't like these. They also didn't like horses either for some reason, which is why you'd sometimes hang a horseshoe in your house. Anyway, point is, there's lots of options available. That's all I've got time for today. I hope you've enjoyed this video, learnt something new, and hope to see you again soon.